Hey, okay. Well, I can tell that somebody's pissed. Somebody's been watching me and isn't happy about the fact that I am not just laying down and dying. There's probably multiple people in that energy, honestly. There's people mad that I'm not giving more to them, that aren't fully paying attention, or when they pay attention, they're like, she seems fine, I don't see what the problem is, why she can't just give me more of herself. There's people who thought I was going to be an easy target, who are frustrated with the fact that I seem like an idiot and they don't understand how I can keep evading them. There's like a little secret that has been running for a really, really long time, so it's starting to get really exhausted. It's not able to hide itself very well anymore. So it's just trying very hard not to be found. And it knows it's about to get found out. And yeah, I'm not in a fearful energy. I'm in a tired energy. I feel like I've been chasing for quite some time. I also feel like I also became the runner in so many different ways, where like I wanted the right things to start chasing me. So it's kind of felt like this back and forth, but I'm not in any sort of fearful energy, more just like an exhausted energy. And then it's like when I start like talking about these things, all of a sudden now I'm like, that's literally just energized moments ago. And suddenly I feel depleted. Okay, I'm actually going to, before I do this, I'm going to do a little cleansing ritual. And then I will be back to put my energy into something. Okay, so bear with me. Okay. Got myself together a little better. Burning some sage, which I need to get a new lighter because mine is almost out and it's not keeping the sage lit. I've had this lighter for months, which I'm not used to. I'm used to people stealing my lighter, for one, and I'm not hanging out with people. Also, normally when I had lighters, it was because I was smoking myself, so I'm used to them actually going out. And this one I use very rarely, so to have it, I mean, I think I got this lighter like 5 months ago or so, if not more. So that's kind of crazy. I ask my angels and my guides, my ancestors, any energies and entities that are in higher realms and dimensions that are working for my greatest good and highest power, to bless me, to remove any of this negativity, any shitty energy that is staying in me. Black it all. If there's anybody with ill intentions towards me at this time, may those intentions turn to love in both directions. No ill intentions coming from me or to me. I don't want to receive anything negative, anything like selfish, short-sighted, shallow. I want access into my deeper core, into my deepest core, to be able to really know and decipher the truth of things. I want a heart of gratitude. Please help me with a heart of gratitude to be able to find reasons to be thankful for all things, ways to properly alchemize all things into tools for my betterment, tools for the betterment of all, that all of the things that I am going to process during this reading will end up being a blessing, not just to me, but to anyone who happens to listen to this. And again, that any sort of evil intentions, any sort of attempts to block any of this positive energy, any of this power that I'm asking for, that it just be turned into love. That it be turned into love on both ends, both giving and receiving. I thank you, Spirit, the universe, those that guide me for this opportunity, for this energy, for this time, for this space. I ask for cleansing in this space. I ask that this reading is blessed, that it blesses those that hear it, and that I carry those blessings with me, that my life is consistently an example of gratitude, an example of positivity, an example of power, of what can be done when you are true to yourself, true to your highest power, connected to all things, and that I remain in those energies, that I remain in my highest power and connected to all things, in love, in truth, in power, in peace. Thank you again for the space, for this opportunity, for my capacity to be able to come into this space and to be able to process things this way. I ask that, again, that you remove and banish any blockages that would try to keep me from my highest power, that would try to keep me from being able to deliver these messages, that would try to block anyone from being able to receive them in their power. I ask that just the energy transferred to me and from me during this period of time be the kind of thing that can bless all of us, myself and those that happen to hear it, that it can elevate us all into our highest power, into our greatest well-being, into our most positive and beneficial timelines, that the whole world is moved into a better position through simple acts of embracing our personal power, and that I stay in that energy so that I can offer that to others, that I am able to example that as I speak on these things, rather than using words and then exempling lower energies. I ask for these positive, powerful, high vibrational energies in order to help elevate this space, these words, these messages, and those that receive them. I love Sage. I thank you again. Thank you so much for the fact that any time that I call on you, you're right there. Thank you for having taught me how to come into this energy and for maintaining my capacity to be able to do so. I am always asking that I be directed towards the most beneficial energies, that I'm clearly directed into the ways that I should go, and I am so thankful when those things are revealed to me and given to me, and when I am capable and able and willing to receive that power, and when it doesn't feel like such a burdensome task, I appreciate it, and I thank you. And I thank you all who happen to come upon this at any given time the time and energy, regardless of what it is. It will all be alchemized into love. But I hope the same for you, and I hope that even when I'm not the greatest example of love and light and truth, when I'm just being in my own shitty energy, that it's something that can still bless you in the genuineness of it. I trust that these things serve a time and purpose, a purpose within their time and space. But I also, do my best to continue to do my work so that I can be in a better space. I hate when it's been consistent readings where I'm just in a low energy. I hate to think that there's people that don't know me, that have never heard anything of me, that happen upon a video, happen to see that, and happen to think anything negatively about the messages that I'm trying to bring forward just because I'm not bringing them forward in the best way, and this is a careful work, and there's a lot of responsibility in it, and I do my very best, and I know that I'm not always perfect, and I still try very hard to remain honest and genuine about those things, but I do intend to get better. I don't want it to be that suddenly the camera's on and I'm perfect and, in my righteousness, and then, the second the camera's off, I'm yelling and screaming and ranting and raving or bitching or, doing whatever. I don't want it to be like that. I want to be very genuine. Whatever energy I bring to the table is the energy that I am in. It's the energy that I want to keep, right? Or it's the energy that I'm actively trying to work out, and I'm doing that right on screen. This is all part of a process, and it is something that I do hope teaches something great and something good. So I thank you. I thank you for the space and for your patience and generosity with those things, for anyone who does happen to take their time to watch these entire videos. For me, when I'm watching different kinds of things, I can watch 3-hour-long videos of the same person talking, even if I don't always fully agree with the things that they have to say. But it's almost like a podcast for me, where just sitting and listening is really beneficial for me. Kind of gets my brain working, gets me thinking about a lot of different things. But I know not everybody's like that, so even if you only pop in for a little bit to watch little parts, I do hope that it's a blessing to you. Even if you literally are only coming here to try to judge me, to try to find something I'm doing wrong so that you can have proof that I'm whatever it is that you say that I am. I just hope that all things that come through me and to me can be alchemized into the highest love, into truth. Even if I don't ever try to be misleading, but if I'm caught up in my own emotions and the messages that I have are not coming across accurately because they're caught up in my shitty emotions and me being selfish or short-sighted or shallow, I hope that even those things are able to be properly alchemized through those that receive them. And then ultimately, all things that I do end up blessing those that I come in contact with. I trust that as much in my life as there's been seemingly negative experiences that have ended up blessing me in the end, that often those things can work that way for others, which is how I step into being more genuine and honest and not so afraid to just come across as shitty. It's hard, especially I notice a lot of different people that do this type of work, especially women, tend to present themselves some way every single time in every single reading, and it almost for me becomes a distraction, right? Because it's okay, do you care more about how you look, or are you actually trying to be given to the true spirit of things, and maybe the spirit isn't always in some love and light energy, or maybe things don't always have to look so great in order to be so powerful, and maybe things you know, just aren't always what they seem that way. So I try to be as genuine as possible. Obviously, it's nice to be able to look a little nicer, to be easier on the eyes, but that's certainly not the most important thing. And if you're anyone like me, then you don't even necessarily sit and watch as much as you sit and listen. Most of the readings I do, actually, most of the readings I listen to, most of the things I listen to it's not just people actively sitting there and talking like I do on this. It's either you're getting to see the cards, or generally you get to see the cards because they pull them, but it's generally like a background, or like podcasts and stuff like that. Like it can be the same screen, just the title screen, the entire time. I almost prefer those things to some degree because it makes it easier to listen. But for me personally, for some reason, this is the way that I keep doing it, and in one, it makes it feel more personal, like I'm able to converse a little better, make it more personal that way. But I also think it allows there a different aspect of genuineness, right? Which is very important to me. You know, maybe there's some people who just sit in their pajamas every single time and, you know, never do themselves up, and that's fine, by the way. I'm not saying anything about it. But, like, they're doing that, and that's behind the screen, and that's what they're doing in order to give their best energy. For me, it's a mix of all of the things at once. You know, I want to be able to present myself well, but I also want to be genuine. So I have plenty of videos where I'm not done up, and I complain about looking like shit. There's several where I'm done up about as much as I ever get, close to it at least, and then there's ones like this where I just, you know, this is generally how I like to present myself, and just like on a day-to-day basis. And I think that those things give to the energy as well. But ultimately, it's not about those things. It's about the engagement and the energy. There's something about being able to see, you know, the live person during the thing. Like, for me, that's a point of integrity and honesty to show that, like, this is all just for real. It's just coming straight from me. It's just my opinion, you know. Like, it shows you that there isn't, you know, some man behind the mask or behind the veil, you know, showing certain things or anything. I mean, that's kind of a lot of times when I'm saying they're listening to people, if you can't see them, then it's like, are you reading a script? Are you getting this from somewhere? Why do all these messages sound so similar to other messages? And then when my messages start to sound that way, it's like, okay, so is this because this is really what's going on? Is this because I'm magnetized to certain readings that feel a certain way and I'm projecting that out? Is this legitimate? Is this like something I'm just buying into because it's an energy that's been out already? I try to be very careful and cautious about those things. It's also why I'm careful and cautious to, like, I want you to see as I pull the cards what they are. I want you to be able to see, show the cards, like, that it's all, you know, this is what I'm working with. I care very much that people know that I'm genuine, not because I care that people are like, oh, you are anything. Like, it's not that. It's because I really do believe in the things that I have to share. I believe that, and because I've seen it in my life. I've seen it since I learned how to talk. Never been very good at shutting up. But even as a child, I could speak. Mostly as a child, I learned to stay stupid, especially around my family. That's what they expected of me. But then, like, in the church, you know, I would talk to adults in the church, and every so often, like, I would just start actually having a conversation with an adult, and they would be blown away. And I had multiple adults when I was growing up be like, how do you know that? You're just a child. Like, do you even understand what you're saying? Like, that was so impactful to me. In 40, 50 years, I've never thought of it that way. Like, I got that a lot when I was a kid, but only when I would speak out. And I very rarely would do that around my family because I didn't feel safe to. In fact, I remember a specific time that my stepdad and I were bringing a woman home from church who was new. She was just a random woman that showed up at the church. And I feel like maybe we even brought her there. Maybe it was somebody he had worked for or something. I don't remember how we got in contact with this woman. But I remember when we were bringing her home, I almost vaguely remember where she lived in Paddock Lake. It was like right as soon as you got into Paddock Lake, you turned off of Highway 50 before Old Settlers Park, and she lived back in the subdivisions over there. And while we were driving home, she was talking to my stepdad. My mom and dad drove separately, and she was talking to him about, and that's, my mom had something to do after church. I think she might have taken our other brother, Brian, home. So my mom and dad would switch off with him. So maybe that's why my dad and I were taking her home. But she was talking to him, you know, about how she wasn't used to going to church, or maybe she had used to going to church or whatever. But she was like, you know, kind of talking up him and my family for being Christians, and was talking up about, you know, the church and how nice it felt and all these things. And it was funny for me even to hear those things, because like I had grown up in those homes and in those churches, you know. I'd almost like kind of I just gotten very accustomed to them in a way where listening to her talk about it gave me a perspective of like people that I could see. I just saw it differently, but like these people who like weren't generally engaged that way, and how they got so much positivity out of it. And that was, I remember feeling like blessed by this woman who was talking about how she's like, I've gotten so far away from God, but just to be able to see these little things has really blessed me. I remember being like, wow, like I've been taking advantage. Now, I was about 8 years old at this time. We had just moved into Paddock Lake. I was 8 or 9. I was not any older than 10 years old. And, you know, the way, I remember even like noting that the way that her and my dad were talking was kind of veiled. And I think that's because they were discussing more like deeper emotional things that were on an adult level, and they were being cautious about how they talked in front of me, right? And I remember for a second almost getting this impression of like, is there something going on between these two? Like, is that, because I did think that it was weird that my stepdad was taking this random woman home, but I was there, and I realized that I was almost like a buffer. And then I caught on to what she was saying, and I realized that like there wasn't like a veiled sexuality as going on as much as it was, she was talking about relationship issues that she had had, and she was talking about things where like my dad, you know, like he has me, I'm a little church girl, and so he's trying to be very cautious as to what this woman who's not accustomed to church or communicating a certain way has to say, right? I mean, I grew up very sheltered, so that's what he was trying to do, was kind of shelter me a bit. And she was being very respectful. She was. But she, like, you know, not being accustomed to the church, hadn't really, there were different things that she said that I kind of was like, oh, that's quite adult. Like, I didn't, you know, nothing inappropriate, but like things that I hadn't heard because I'd been so sheltered. Also because she talked about getting a divorce. And I don't think I'd heard an adult talk about divorce prior to that. I remember my stepdad getting kind of on edge about it, but he wasn't going to be rude and let this woman not talk, especially because my family has always really been good about that, not judging others in that way or making people that aren't Christian feel comfortable in a space with people that are, because they're not judgmental like that. They're judgmental of Christians, but they're not judgmental of non-Christians, which I very much appreciate. I appreciate having learned that, and, you know, that my family is like that. And this woman appreciated that as well, you know. So she was like kind of talking about these things, like almost like a sort of counseling from my dad, just because he was a Christian, and, you know, she just had this opportunity to talk about these things. And she was saying something about her ex-husband, you know, whatever it was that she said, like she was trying to talk in a veiled way, but didn't really know how to very well. But it wasn't even that. I mean, she was still talking about an adult subject that I really had no reason to fully grasp. But I did. And not only did I fully grasp it, I understood the emotional depths that she was talking about. And I realized that, like, my stepdad necessarily couldn't do that, or was also almost intimidated to do that because he's a man and she's now a now single woman, and he's trying to be a good Christian example, and, you know, it was kind of awkward that way. But she's just talking about these things. And I remember feeling like, as a girl, I should say something, like, to let her know, like, as a woman, like, from a woman's perspective. I'm fucking, like, 9 years old, right? I don't really have a woman's perspective at this point, but she's talking something about her ex-husband, and I remember considering, I'm sitting in the back seat, and I'm thinking about how I understand where she's coming from. I can totally understand her emotions. But what I also understood was that her emotions were largely coming from a place where she wasn't fully recognizing her husband's emotions, and the breakdown of those things. So much so that it was causing her pain. It was a negative thing for her to not properly see those things. She wasn't able to properly process her own emotions because she was holding so much against herself and so much against him, because she wasn't empathizing with him. And granted, it was probably valid to some degree, because I'm sure he wasn't being decent to her. And in the same hand, I'm even thinking about it now, where, like, it would have been inappropriate for my dad to have really said anything, because it probably would have sounded like he was trying to defend the man, and that would have not been helpful in the situation, right? Out of nowhere, I just pipe up from the back of the car, and I told her, I just remember her being like, I just don't understand why he would be like this, or why he would say this, or something like that. And I was like, well, he probably didn't realize that you felt like this or whatever. Maybe he was thinking like this. I don't remember exactly what I said, but that was the structure of what I had said. And I remember her going, wow, that was really profound. And she was like, I think you're right. She said, you know, for being so young, you sure have she's like, you're sure an old soul, huh? You got a lot of wisdom in you. And I remember my dad kind of laughing and was like, her? Yeah, she's an old soul, all right. And, like, because they thought I was an idiot, right? And they always made fun of me for being stupid. And I was often being quite stupid. But that was the standard that was set for me within my home. Like I said, like, it was outside of my home and with these other adults where all of a sudden I would say things and they'd be like, wow, you're an old soul. Like, I've been here 4 times as long as you have, 5 times as long as you have, 6 times as long as you have, and I never once thought about that. Like, you're very insightful. I've gotten that my whole life. It's gotten more and more and more as I've gotten older. And so I've taken more and more responsibility for that. It used to seem like a fluke, like some type of farce. And when my family would treat it as such, I would often validate that for them, because I believed it myself, because of that environment that I was in that was so limiting. But as I got out of that, like, I mean, there isn't a place I go or a person that I talk to that doesn't experience some level of that with me. I'm well aware at this point that it's a gift. And so I care very much to handle that with as much sense of responsibility as possible. And I'm aware that my shitty, selfish, shallow, bitter, hurt attitude doesn't help anything. That's not where wisdom's gonna come, you know? Not that it can't be helpful. Even in those spaces, like, I mean, I've found that, like, just expressing my humanity at times is extremely helpful for people, because it's like, oh, wow, I'm not alone. Okay, wow. So like you can really be on top of so many different things at so many different times, but you can still feel like that. That's actually really encouraging because now I realize that it's okay for me to feel this way. I don't have to let it hold me back from continuing to do these other things. That's huge. And so I try not to hide those things either. But like more and more, like I do try to remember to embrace that, like I have always had this profound connection to the universe and like been able to connect with all of these different types of things that I've been teaching people my whole life, you know? And I remember like the Bible story of Jesus going into the temple at 12 years old and like essentially preaching from the sacred texts. Like he wasn't just reading them, you know, he was literally expounding on these ideas that so many, you know, religious adults didn't even fully grasp. And he was making sense of them in a way because if a 12-year-old can explain it, it's probably going to be a little easier for you to understand, right? And Jesus was very, very good at speaking in metaphors, that was one of my favorite things about reading the Bible growing up. And like my favorite things about Jesus as a character is his capacity for metaphors. Fucking love metaphors. And I love making a metaphor out of everything. I think it's such a beautiful way to communicate. And that's what I've done, you know, like that's a big one that I've done that a lot of people respond really well to. That's actually how I've learned to communicate to so many different kinds of people, different ages, different, you know, cultures, all these different types of things is through metaphors. Because like I might not understand your exact scenario, but I understand the idea behind it enough that I can tell a story that you can then relate to, however it is that you choose to. And I love that shit. So, you know, I try to take these things seriously and I try to make the most. And yeah, it is a gift, you know, it's a gift that was given to me. That's not something I can claim for my own power. Like I'm so great. It's literally the universe gave it to me to give to others. And so I just do my best, you know. And there are times that I find myself, you know, essentially forsaking that out of whatever emotions, fear of, you know, judgment, or normally it's fear of judgment, it's fear of rejection, it's fear of conflict. That'll keep me from those things. But for the most part, you know, I just do my best. And for the most part, I do an okay job. At least at being real and reasonable, you know. I've definitely not always been that way. Definitely had to cultivate that. I am a woman after all. I know a lot of women don't like when I talk like that, but come on, guys, be real with me. Women aren't normally given to being that reasonable. Men aren't either. Everybody's ridiculous, but especially women. I mean, no. It's in different ways, but I digress. Right now isn't the time for misogyny, right? No. It's the time for destiny. This is the card that I've been using this whole time. I just pulled it off the top of the deck and I've been using it to stoke the little kindlings in my sage pile. But there's my 4-leaf clover. It's been showing up the last few days. Despite my shitty attitude all last week and how much I've struggled with it, even yesterday. I mean, yesterday, I had a shitty attitude. Yesterday I had a very shitty attitude. The day before. I think it was the day before yesterday. No, it was yesterday. I had a bad attitude. And I felt like I was expressing myself fine, but I also felt like I couldn't even control the fact that I had to express myself. I was talking to my friend Ian and I was just like going off. I was venting to him, and thankfully he was so incredibly kind and generous to let me do that. I hate doing that. I really, really hate doing that to people. I hate talking negatively. I hate complaining. I hate putting my emotions onto anyone else, especially like, it's one thing for if I actually have advice I'm trying to ask for, but if I like ask somebody, you know, if I'm just like saying shit just because I need to get the energy out because I can't handle it, but I'm giving it to somebody else, like, I do not like to do that. It just often feels quite toxic to me. But I was very upset to the point where I was like, and he just happened to call me and want to talk, and I was like, trying my hardest to not be a total dick. But I just kept finding myself like in this angry energy and just going off. And I went off for like an hour, just telling him all this shit that had triggered me, that I'd obviously been suppressing. Then I apologized. I was like, thank you, thank you for letting me vent. Thank you for being kind about it. But that wasn't right of me. That's not fair. That's not reasonable. That's not the energy I'm trying to be in. And he was like, it's cool. Like, you got to get it out somehow. I'm happy to be here for you. But it's still, I just kept apologizing a bit about it. And then today when I talked to him, he was like, like, I think you did a really, because he's known me for a long time. He's heard me go off before. He's also heard me absolutely break down in tears about things because I can't control them and can't control myself, And he told me, like, I think you handled yourself really well yesterday. I was like, oh, geez. I didn't necessarily feel that way. And he's like, I think that you handled yourself a lot better than you think you did. He was like, I think, your feelings were valid. He's like, you can get a bit crazy. You can get a bit much. And he's like, but at the same time, like, usually all it takes is a tiny bit of, like, encouragement, support, understanding, or discipline, and suddenly you're just like, you're great. So, I don't think you need to beat yourself up. Like, you went off, you said what you needed to say, and then as soon as I was like, oh, I totally get it, then you were like, oh, okay, thank you, I'm sorry for putting that all on you. And you're like, no, I get it. Like, he's like, I think that you can be quite reasonable. And that's such a compliment, because it's something I care very much about, and it's something I do put a lot of energy into, and I have all my life. But I didn't have the first clue of how to actually be reasonable for a lot of my life. I was also raised, by misogynists that believed that women can't be given to reason. My mom validates being emotionally unstable. She's a woman. She's allowed to be that way. My stepdad validates her being emotionally unstable. Don't upset your mom. You know how she gets. He also told me my whole life that women, that's just how women are, and then my brothers, being raised in the same household, like, saw all the same things I did and were like, yeah, women must just be insane, and then they get with toxic women and, are like, yeah, see, women are insane. And it's like, yeah, I feel you, because I was also insane. And it's not that I'm not capable of it still, to some degree. But I try very hard not to be. I just try to be real. If I'm insane, I'm insane. But generally speaking, I just don't, that's not what I'm after. I prefer being balanced. That's what makes me feel good. That's what makes me feel sustainable. I like feeling sustainable. I don't like being in constant chaos. I don't like feeling like I have to try to control everything. I don't like most of any of that type of shit that I know has become quite common for women, behaviorally. So, I take pride in that. I really do. And as much as my sense of humor and my comedy tends to be pretty misogynistic, satirical, passive-aggressive even. Most of it's supposed to be taken that way. But, like, it's very heavy on the stuff where, like, if a woman is in her emotions instead of being at all reasonable, she's probably going to get triggered, and then she's going to prove the things that I'm saying. But that's kind of also the point, is because the women that get the humor are women that are being reasonable, and it's proof that women can be reasonable. Most of them just have a terrible sense of humor. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is not my time to be talking shit. This card has been coming up. Destiny, the 4-leaf clover. Not this card in of itself, but the concept of destiny and the 4-leaf clover. Which is right. So funny, we're getting there. But it's not even like, you don't even have to wish. I think the crossing of the fingers is supposed to be almost like an uncrossing, like hopefully things aren't bad, right? Like it's like a hoping. But really, my destiny is something beyond that. Like, it's not hoping I find a 4-leaf clover. It's knowing that I'm going to find one, because I've been planting clovers this entire time, and in the entire field of clovers, guaranteed to find at least one 4-leaf. I used to always search for 4-leaf clovers when I would take my dogs to the dog park. They had a favorite park in East Troy that we would go to, because there was 2 sides that were very large of an enclosed park area. And they loved that because those areas always smelt very much like dogs. That's generally where the dogs would go to the bathroom, and then they'd go for hikes. Or people would just bring their dogs there. So it smelled like tons of different types of dogs. And my girls loved it. They loved going and rolling and all the stinky spots all over the grass. They loved being able to smell all the smells. They loved going as much as we would go. And then we would go for hikes. And there was maybe 4 miles total that you could go any which way if you took the entire trails through different types of woods and different types of swamp areas by a little pond, different stuff like that all throughout this one area. Beautiful. My girls loved it. And so when I would take them, I would let them do whatever they wanted. Sometimes I would chase them around, but generally I would walk around the whole thing. Sometimes they would follow. Sometimes they'd just do whatever they wanted. Normally I would call them from one end to the other just to wear them out. But as I was doing that, I would pretty much just like walk through the whole thing. I'd walk around it all, and then I'd walk through it all looking for 4-leaf clovers. And I often found them. Often. I didn't always pick them. But there was one day in particular where I'd been like going through a lot, and I had moved out from my exes and started a new job and was like feeling all these types of ways. And I remember being like, man, I could really use some luck. I could really use some luck right now. So I decided to really check for them when I took the girls. And I found in one day at one park, I found 15 4-leaf clovers. And there was several of them, at least 3 of them that had 5 leaves. And there was one of them that had 6 leaves. That was so wild to me. I'd never seen anything like it. And I remember being like, there must be something in dog poop that like makes these clovers like this, because how the fuck did I find 15 4-leaf clovers in one day? And I remember being like, this is what I needed. Like, I manifested this. Like, I felt like I had manifested it. And I did pluck a handful of them and, like pressed them, essentially. And I gave them to people. I actually made cute little cards and I gave them to, so I kept them for a while. I kept some of them for a while. I gave some of them out. I kept other ones for a while because it was like, it had to have been at least a year. I think it was 2 years after having plucked them and pressed them that I started working landscaping, and I loved my landscaping job. I loved the guys that I worked with. We built such a bond. Felt like hanging out with my brothers again. It felt so nice. I loved those guys so much, and I would like make them things. And I made them these cards that had the 4-leaf clovers. And I remember my boss being like, "You really," or not, well, my supervisor, who was younger than me, being like, "You're really gonna give us these?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "These are 4-leaf clovers." I was like, "I don't know." My coworker said that. My supervisor didn't even realize. He thought I drew it because I drew him pictures. So he thought that I had drawn the 4-leaf clover. He didn't even realize it was real. And then when he found it was real, I was like, "Yeah, I found those. Like, those are real 4-leaf clovers that I really found and pressed, and I'm now giving to you." And they were like, "Oh, we can't take these. That's your luck." I was like, "I'm happy to share it. Like, take it." And it's funny because, like, I was talking to my roommate about that the other day, where I was talking about how, like, the luck of the Irish is historically bad luck. And he was like, "Well, then don't give me any of that." And I was like, "Well, maybe that's why it's such bad luck. Like, it's bad for us because we're so generous with it. We're just always giving it to everybody else, and then we don't have anything left for ourselves." He was like, "Okay, sure, whatever you say." But that's the thing about destiny as well, right? Because this isn't just hoping I find these things. The luck of those 4-leaf clovers that I had found was in, like, how lucky must you be to be able to find them because they're so rare. But it wasn't even luck that time. I manifested them to be there and then did hard work to look for them. I probably looked for like an hour and a half to find all of those. You know, like I really was doing the work. It wasn't just like they just showed up. Like I was looking for them. So it wasn't necessarily luck. But even more so is that message that, like, this isn't a sign of luck. It's a sign of abundance, of abundance. There's an extra leaf, and it's like a rare abundance, but that's your destiny. Like, you can't run from that. You can't hide from that. It's part of the work that's being done. It's not something you necessarily have to hope for. But the hope there is giving me this idea of, like, expecting the unexpected. Well, how do you do that? The second that you expect it, it's no longer unexpected. Aren't you just kind of contradicting the manifestation in that way? But it's like, no, that's kind of, we're talking about, like, having faith, right? Which I was just talking to my friend Ian about too, where it was like, you know, and I've said this in multiple readings now, if you're driving over a hill and you can't see the other side, you have to just kind of have faith that the road continues on the other side. There's not necessarily any guarantee if you've never been on that road before. But chances are that the road is going to continue. And even if it doesn't, it's still better to hope that it does and to drive that way and then overreact, get all freaked out that maybe there isn't a road. It's more likely that there is a road than that there isn't. Sure, there are times that you work extremely hard for something and you still don't get it. But generally speaking, if you plant a seed where it needs to be planted, at the time it needs to be planted, and you train it up the way that it should go, you'll receive a harvest from it at the time that you could expect to receive a harvest. And it's better to behave that way and then let the ones that don't sprout be an off chance than to anticipate that none of that's going to grow, because one, why else would you be doing the work? You're going to end up making the work that much harder for you, and you're more likely to stop even doing the work the right way, right? So hold on to hope. talking about holding on to hope. I would say that this year has definitely been trying to teach me that. It's definitely been teaching me that. It's been so crazy because last year was also last year was cultivating hope for sure. It was almost training me in what my faith really was supposed to look like in action. But by the end of the year and by the beginning of this year, it was almost like I had cultivated an extremely strong faith, but had yet to truly see the benefits of that. In fact, things had continued to feel like they were just getting worse and worse. And I remember that I had an opportunity at one point earlier this year to be like, okay, so are you just going to be like, well, none of this was worth it. All that faith just lost me everything, so fuck it. Or are you going to say, okay, I just don't see it yet, but I know that it's going to be there. I know something better is coming. And ultimately, I mean, this whole year I was in a far better situation than I was last year by any stretch of the imagination. However, it's still not ideal. It's not, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not totally settled down by any stretch of the imagination. There's still lots of work to be done. But in comparison, yeah, it's something much greater. And in comparison as well, like where I was laying down the foundations, proper foundations to sow true faith last year. This year I've began to actually see that growth, and it's stable. And it's like, it's kind of like seeing, the cornfields at knee length. I guess it's supposed to be knee length by July, right? So we really should be in a harvest time at this point. I think I was a little late on the chase. But it's like seeing these things crop up to the point where it's like, oh, I can see that the tomatoes are growing. Now it's just about waiting for them to get big enough before I pluck them. Like I can actually see these things. I really can. It's hard because then sometimes other things will happen where it's like, oh, it just feels like it's never going to get here. It feels like, what if somebody else comes and they start picking their tomatoes, and it's like, damn, your tomatoes are already sprouted up yet? You're like, yours already sprouted? And I'm still waiting on mine to grow? What if they don't grow anymore? What if this is it? It's like, okay, don't put that energy out there. We're not putting our hope in the worst, right? If it hasn't come to fruition yet, why am I putting out there that it could potentially be the worst thing? Habit. I've done that my whole life, but we're not doing it anymore. So cut that out. We have the girdle of Venus in the reverse, and we have the sun in the reverse. Hold on. Can I have a positive? Not necessarily a positive, if that's not what's being called, but I need a card in the upright to clarify these, please. It's exactly what I just said, time in the upright. Okay. So, we have like wishing. It's a feminine energy, so it's like this idea of like hope in something greater. It's this feeling of like looking for comfort, seeing the beauty in things, embracing the small things, cultivating a hope out of those things. But because it's in the reverse, it's like a feeling of disempowerment, a feeling of a lack of balance with nature, with the greater world around us. Being in one's emotions but not feeling balanced. right? And then we have the sun in reverse, which is like starting to get negative. I'm not seeing any positive results. I am starting to feel like there's nothing worth hoping in, because what I see is darkness. I'm not seeing the light yet, right? Is this my destiny? When those are the only cards that come out, when those are the only cards that you have on the table, and you're already aware that the last card that came out is destiny and luck and hope, right? You can start to feel a little luckless and hopeless, as if your destiny were really for you to be somehow imbalanced, somehow in a negative state. But I promise that no one's destiny is that. That's a matter of choice. It wasn't Pharaoh's destiny in the Bible. Okay. In the Bible, the Pharaoh at the time of Moses, I think it was Ramses, I don't remember. But he has all of the Israelites enslaved, right? And Moses comes in. He's the son of a Hebrew, and he was found as a baby in a basket. He had been sent in a basket as a baby. If you don't know the Bible story, most probably do, because the Bible's quite popular here in this country, but in case you don't know. So the Pharaoh at the time of Moses being born had put out a decree that any baby boy under 2 years old, and this is something that happened multiple times in the Bible, but that any baby boy under 2 years old was to be killed. Israelite, Hebrew. It was a form of genocide in order to keep that race submitted, essentially, in order to keep them a slave race, in order to keep them impoverished. So they would have these regular genocides. And there was a decree for that. So all of the Hebrew babies were getting drowned in the Nile. But Moses' mother weaved a basket and put little tiny baby Moses in a basket and sent him down the Nile in hopes that maybe that would give him a chance to survive. Maybe he would end up somewhere else, and somebody would take him in. And she prayed on him, God, please protect my baby. Please give him somewhere safe to be. And it just so happened that the Pharaoh's wife, the Pharaoh's daughter, someone affiliated with the Pharaoh, happened to see the basket on the Nile, and drew it in, found a baby in it, and decided to keep the baby and to raise it as one of their own. And this boy grew up, was named Moses, which meant drawn from the water, and was raised up as an Egyptian. And not just any Egyptian, but Egyptian royalty. To the point where at a fairly young age, as a young adult, he was given the role of, what was that called? He was not a slave driver, but like he, was like a head chief of the, the functions of the royal, I don't even know what you would call it, society, I guess, that oversaw the slaves. And during that position, during that role, he saw these other Egyptian taskmasters, in the same role that he essentially was, or even higher than him, like a supervisor of his, mistreating slaves. He saw slaves getting mistreated, but he saw this one in particular unjustly beating a slave. And it just triggered an anger in him I don't know. I don't even know at this point. I don't remember if he knew that he was actually Hebrew or not. Maybe it was, and then he started to feel some type of way, and he was like, these are my people, and they're all enslaved, and I'm supposed to be above them, and then he sees that happening. I don't know for sure. But either way, he ends up actually killing this taskmaster, and then he's in trouble, you know, so he flees Egypt. And after fleeing, he leaves. He just leaves. He gets older, gets married. I think he has a couple kids. And that's interesting because he actually found his brother. So he must have, he somehow found his family at some point, because he actually finds his real brother, Abram. Abram? Is that his name? I think so. It's not the Abraham, like one of the forefathers of Judaism, but I do believe his name is Abram. And so, like, okay, so then Moses is like out of Egypt, and he's a sheep herder. And one day, while herding his sheep, he comes upon this bush that's on fire. And the fire starts to speak to him. And it tells him, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. And he, alarmed, does, and falls onto his face, and immediately is overwhelmed with the idea that God is talking to him through this bush. And essentially the voice of what he assumes to be God talking through this bush tells him to go to Egypt and to free the slaves, to talk to Pharaoh, to get him to release the slaves, and then to lead the slaves into the promised land. Jordan, I believe, right? I believe it's Jordan. Yeah, that's interesting. So, at first he's like, why me? That doesn't even make any sense. And then, he's like, oh, right, because you were called for it. That's why you were saved as a baby in the basket. That's why, you were raised in the temples and in the whatever, it's not a castle, whatever the fuck it's called, where the pharaohs lived. He's like, your whole life has been set up for you to do this. You are the one being called to free the slaves, and I want you to go do it. And he's like, but I'm not even good at talking. Like, why would you call me to be the speaker on behalf of all of the slaves when, like, my brother is literally known as an oracle. Like, his brother was known for his orative. Is that the right word? Orative skills? I don't know why I'm having a hard time speaking right now. The irony. So, the bush is like, I'm not talking to your brother. I'm talking to you. I'm calling to you. This is what I want you to do. He's like, okay. So he goes, he listens. He's obedient. He doesn't really understand it, but he goes. And he talks to Pharaoh. And at first Pharaoh's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then, in the Bible it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart at first. So he's like, no, I'm not freeing the slaves. Are you fucking kidding me? They're building me my fucking pyramids. Why would I let these people go? You think we're going to do that ourselves? Like, no, I'm not freeing the slaves. You're insane. Where is this even coming from? Weren't you one of us? Like, why are you saying this? And so then Moses is told to ask again. And so he asks again and again. Pharaoh's heart is hardened by God to say no. Moses starts to feel a bit discouraged, but his faith doesn't waver. And instead he is told again to ask one more time, and he asks one more time. And this time, God softens Pharaoh's heart. And Pharaoh says, you know what? Take him. take them. Do whatever it is that you want to do with all the slaves. Egypt is great. Egypt will always be great. We'll find some way. Do whatever it is that you want, Moses. Go ahead and take all the slaves. I don't think he even knew what he was saying or why. I don't think he even believed himself when he said it. But Moses is like, okay, that's all I need. Come on, guys. And all the slaves follow him. And he leaves. And they all leave Egypt. They all wander off into the distance, into the wilderness. And it takes a couple days of nothing getting built and nothing getting done, and Pharaoh realizing that he doesn't really want to have to roll his own burritos to realize that maybe he wants the slaves back. So he's like, all right, you know what? Commander, get the armies together. We're going to go back after those guys. They're like, what? And he's like, we're going to go get our slaves back. I'm not going to give myself a massage. That's gross. I need a slave to do it. So the commander's like, okay, we'll get the armies together. So the Israelites are wandering through the wilderness. Mind you, they've been doing this now for 40 years. They did it a total of 40 years. So, like, that's a time. That's a long time. I don't know exactly how long it took before Pharaoh was like, you know what, I don't want to keep doing this. Let's go get them bitches back. But he did. And, well, he tried to. They got the armies together to go get the Israelites. They go to get the Israelites. The Israelites, at this point, have been wandering through the fucking wilderness following some guy who is like, they're like, weren't you one of those guys? Why are we even listening to you? He was like, because God, your God, our God, told me to do this. And they were like, yeah, we believed that at first, but that was before we were all starving and wandering around aimlessly for 40 years. It really seems like you don't know what you're doing. We really don't feel like we're getting anywhere. We don't even know if there really is a promised land. And at this point, all we can think about is, yeah, we were slaves, but at least we got to eat every day. This sucks. And so then God hears the complaining. And he's like, I'll feed you guys. So he sends manna from heaven. And at first everybody's real grateful for it, but then they start to get a little ungrateful. They start to get a little greedy about it when they realize that it's not just going to show up whenever. At first it's everything. And at first they're extremely happy. Then they get a little upset about it. And then, you know, they get a little greedy about it. And then they'll get cursed for that. Moses starts getting frustrated with them. He starts beating rocks and shit. He's told to hit the rock in order for water to come out, but he hits it really hard because the Israelites are annoying the shit out of him. And relatable. But guess what? Moses being a dick, which is reasonable as far as I'm concerned, made it so that he couldn't go to the promised land. God still used him to lead the Israelites to the promised land. After 40 years, they finally made it. But Moses didn't get to go in there with them. He had to go up and sit by himself on a mountain while he watched them go into the promised land. Because he had hit the rock too hard. It wasn't really about the hitting of the rock. It was that he had gotten conceited with the power to rule. Because it wasn't about him in the first place. And he had convinced himself that, you know, I'm irritated. These people are irritating. I'm going to take it out on the very thing that God told me to do. I can't judge, I can only relate, to be honest. Before they get into the promised land, the Pharaoh finally finds them. And he's like, there they are. Get them. And all the other Israelites are like, oh my God, the Pharaoh. What are we going to do? He's going to make us be slaves again. I know we were just talking about how much better that was, but now we're feeling differently. And Moses was like, okay, God, what do you want? Because I don't understand why any of this has happened. And first God shows up as a big cloudy pillar, like a tornado, and keeps all the armies back. And then a fiery pillar at nighttime. But the armies keep pushing through, and they're getting closer and closer to come get the Israelites back. And at that point, God says, Moses, stretch out your hand with your staff before the Dead Sea. Red Sea? One of the seas. Whichever one's by Jordan. They're probably both right there, actually. I don't know. Either the Red Sea or the Dead Sea. I don't remember. But he stretched out his hand with his staff, and to everyone's amazement, including the pharaohs, the sea opened up a path so that in the middle of it was a dry path for everyone to walk through. And they're like, you've got to be kidding me. But at the same time, this is such an incredible miracle. Everybody has to believe, like, damn, God's really showing out. So they walk the path. All the Israelites gather onto it and start walking it to the other side in order to get away from Pharaoh, right? And Pharaoh follows them into it. The Israelites all get to the other side, safe and sound. And as soon as they're all to the other side, and Pharaoh and his armies are now on the dry path, pursuing the Israelites, God closes the sea, and it swallows them up, Pharaoh and armies and all. The reason I tell this story is, one, because we can see the importance of not getting into these negative energies, because that's not how you end up seeing the promised land. The second you start saying, oh, my destiny must be really shitty because everything feels really shitty right now, you're manifesting that for yourself. And what you're being asked to do, and what I'm being asked to do, is to not do that. To not do that. Let's learn something from that story of Moses. Let's be better than that, right? Because the point was that the destiny was that God was going to use these people regardless. Not that something super great was promised. But something great was promised. That abundance was promised, but only to those willing to receive it. And these energies aren't in a good space to be willing to receive. It's the opposite of that. They're both actively not receiving. So if you want to be on the side of Pharaoh, if you want to be on the side of Moses, where you've become embittered against the tasks that God has called you to, against the gifts that the universe has given you, in order to help others, in order to care for others, in order to create a more sustainable system, even at your own compromise, don't expect that you're going to see things the way that you would like to see them. Because that's not the energy you're putting out. That's not the energy you're going to receive. You reap what you sow. But also don't be so greedy and so out of balance and so lazy and so desiring of control that you've already determined what your destiny is to be. My destiny is to be the highest King Pharaoh. So I get to pursue these Israelites down to their death and get them back. And that is what I'm going to do, because that's my destiny. You don't get to dictate those things. And you will quickly find yourself completely awash in your own bullshit. And that will be part of the destiny. Because ultimately the destiny didn't change. The destiny was just that the Israelites were going to end up in the promised land. And Egypt was going to continue the way that it was going to continue one way or the other, which was without the slaves. The Pharaoh could have chosen to just let them go and to build a stronger Egypt that didn't require slavery. He wasn't willing to do that. And so he met his demise. That was on him, right? And so it's this mindset too, where it's just like, just be patient. Because even like the Israelites, like 40 years? You're telling me it's been 40 years of us just walking around in circles out in the desert. For what? For what? Does this place even exist? There's no way. And it is funny because like, it definitely didn't. I mean, the promised land from where they originally started in Egypt, it wouldn't take 40 years to walk there. It'd take like maybe 4 months tops, probably. So maybe, that could be even an exaggeration, I really don't know, but it definitely wouldn't take 40 years. Maybe it's just because there were so many of them and it was hard to like keep them all. I imagine it was hard. It was hard for me to walk for 2 fucking months down to Texas. I can only imagine that the more people that I had, the longer it would have taken. For sure. But 40 years, like, that's 2 generations of people. You know, at that point, like, the people that left, that's the thing. Like, most of the slaves were probably, like, fucking teenagers through maybe 30 something. 40 years, most of those people were dead, if not dying, and it was their children that were actually going into the promised land. Consider that too. The promised land was promised to the people, but it wasn't even the same people. So of course they got that way. Of course they were getting impatient. Moses, you took us out of slavery where we were getting food every day. Yeah, we were getting whipped and beaten, but we got used to that. We were also eating every day. And now we're just wandering around confused, not eating most of the time, being told by some crazy dude that killed some other dude that there's a promised land flowing with milk and honey. And it's starting to feel like you're just making that shit up because my spouse is dead, I'm dying of cancer, my kids are already grown, their kids are already almost grown, and we still haven't seen shit. Yeah, it's really, when those are the circumstances, like, it gets hard to hold on to faith. I tell you what, it really does. Doesn't mean that the faith wasn't proven to be worth it in the end. Anyone who did happen to keep on faith, who could see that far, and I don't know if any of them even did, but anybody who could have, would have seen it come to fruition. Because eventually they did get to the promised land. But Moses didn't get to go. You know? Again, you don't get to dictate these things. I mean, even the mindset, I was just thinking about it yesterday or earlier today. Last year was so hard. This year was so much better in comparison. Last year was so fucking hard. I had Maggie, my dog, 14 and a half years. She lived to be 15, but I didn't get to see her in her last few months, which will forever break my heart. But I had her for 14 years. I had Lily for 4 years. I knew her for 6. Four years of Lily's life. 14 years of Maggie's life. Her entire life. All I wanted was to give them a safe home. Somewhere that was ours, that I could come home every day. And that they could just be comfortable and happy. And like, that I could be making enough money that like, they could always have the nice things. They could always have a special treat. They could always have like the nicest beds. I mean, I did my very best. They always had things, they did. I did my very best by them, but it was always at my own expense. The point where like I was living out of my car. Now granted, my entire car was set up for them. Beds and blankets and toys and bones and all these different things. They never went without food. But I couldn't always afford good food for them. Oftentimes it was cheap food. They always had treats on top of it, but it was often cheap treats. They lived out of a car for years. Granted, I was sleeping in the front seat of a car for years. You know, not even in the passenger. I had the steering wheel in front of me so that all of that space could be for them because they were cramped up in it. And granted, through all of that time, I mean, I was traveling and I got to take them on hikes and all these incredible places that we probably would have never otherwise seen. I gave them the best life that I could. And I suppose that next year I'll start cultivating a better appreciation for how much I really was able to give them. But it was hard this year to finally get into a space where people aren't trying to kill me, where people aren't stalking me, where people aren't on drugs. You know, it's a nice place. It isn't falling apart. You know, there's so much to be thankful for about it. But it took losing both of my girls. They're both gone. They're dead. They died last year. They both died at my parents' house under weird circumstances. At least they were in a house. I couldn't even be there for Maggie. It took losing them to realize how fucked my priorities were. If I could have just prioritized myself a little bit more when I had them, I could have gotten myself out of the situation that I was constantly in. But I was so scared that I wasn't going to see that was never going to happen for me. And that if I compromised being able to provide for them everything that I was able to provide for them, even just for a short time, that would make their lives not worth living. It was so hard for me to see so much further ahead. That, listen, 3 months of them having to go without could give you just enough time to actually get into that space, to actually provide those things for them. But I just kept doubling down on this idea that, like, if I just sacrifice a little bit more, I'll get there. It's all about the sacrifice. And their lives were what ended up being sacrificed. And what a shitty fucking lesson to have to learn. It shouldn't have been like that. They deserved way better than that. So as much as this year has been, in comparison to last year, significantly better, and I can't be anything but grateful for it, because 2020 to 2023 was like progressively harder and harder and harder. Things just kept getting harder. There was things that were so much greater and so much better, and so many things to be so thankful for. I mean, I saw everything. So much of my life was so incredible, but at the same time, a lot of it just got really hard, you know? And it just kept, like, the harder kept getting harder, the better kept getting better. But after I lost them, like, it really felt like everything, like, I mean, I couldn't get any lower than that. I lost everything when I lost them. So in comparison, this year was obviously much easier, much better. In comparison to the last, like, 5 years, this year was much better. But it was hard to process that, like, it took that to get here. And it shouldn't have been like that. I just wasn't really seeing things clearly, you know? That's why, like, I'll beat myself up for getting into the wrong attitude about things when I realize it, because it's like, I already know the damage that can do. I know how much that can take from you so easily. It's not worth it to be in that mindset. You know, striking the rock just hard enough, just the one time, is enough to ensure that you never get to see paradise. Not a fan. Not a fan, but I have experienced it firsthand. I mean, because it's like that too, I imagine. Moses had spent 40 years in the wilderness with all of those people. They were his people. You know? Only to end up on a mountain somewhere where he didn't get to see paradise with them. You know? And like, even when I get into the space I really have always been after, this has been part of it for sure. This certainly ain't it. And like, even when I reach that point, it's not gonna be, it could be even so much better. And I certainly anticipate that it will be, to be honest. But there's still that piece of me that, like, I had longed so much for that idea to be able to have that with my dogs. And I never was able to reach that. It's not worth it. It's really, really important. As hard as it is, it's like, as hard as it would have been to have let my ex, who was not the greatest to me all the time, but was always very good with them, I was scared that if he took them, I wouldn't see them again, or that he would hold them against me in order to try to control me. But man, 3 months of that, to get back on top of things so that I could have provided for my girls what I had always wanted to, is all that it would have taken. And I could have done that. And I wasn't willing to do that because I was living in fear. It's not worth it. Don't let fear rob you of the blessings attached to your destiny. It's destiny regardless. It doesn't matter if the clover's there or not. Okay, you plant clovers, you plant fields and fields and fields of clovers, and fields and fields and fields of clovers grow. It doesn't matter if any of them have 4 leaves. Your abundance is still there. But those special little gifts that the universe wants to give you those extra little blessings to make things that much better, it's just so much more special that way. Those things require hope and faith. They don't just come by chance. Like I said, like the luck, like it isn't just by chance. It's literally doing the right work, looking the right way, doing the right things, manifesting the right things. So like, don't sabotage yourself. It's so hard because it's so easy to do, especially when everybody else is so willing to sabotage you, to not just give in and be like, fuck it, fine. You know, it's hard. I'm not saying it isn't. Just give it time. Give it time, prioritize your time. Look at what your time is filled with. And look at what it turns into. And consider maybe putting your time into other things so that it returns back as something else, you know? That thing wasn't working, but I thought if I just doubled down on it more and more, maybe I'm just not doing it enough. Yes, I'm giving literally everything I fucking have in this direction, and it just keeps hitting a wall, but that's probably just because I'm not good enough. So I just have to keep doing it more and more and more and more. I promise you that's insanity. And there isn't a blessing at the end of that. You can't be given to a cursed mindset and then expected to manifest your blessings. I was always worthy of more than I was giving myself. And because I couldn't give it to myself or refused to give it to myself, I also couldn't give it to those that I loved and cared for. My dogs were everything. Everything. So much so that I compromised myself constantly just to place them above me. And that was never truly loving. That kept them in positions that they didn't deserve to be in. It kept me in a position that I didn't deserve to be in. And them by proxy. That's not fair. They deserved a master, an owner, a mom that loved herself and cared for herself so that they could be an extension of that, because that's what they were. But I didn't want them to be an extension of me because I didn't love myself properly. I wanted just to put them above me because I felt like shit about myself. But I didn't feel like shit about them. It's not that it wasn't understandable. Moses smacking that fucking rock was terribly understandable. Doesn't make it right. And you can tell that it isn't right by the consequences that it has, right? I didn't get to see paradise with them. I didn't get to give them that. They suffered because I was willing to suffer. That's not fair. I never deserved that either. So then I had to suffer twice as hard in their loss just to come to that concept. I promise you it's not worth it. It's so much more worth it just to put your faith in the things that actually matter, to reprioritize your time and space and energy. It's hard. It doesn't come easy. That's the point of faith. But you turn that sun upside down, you see that there is something to be positive about. You let that light shine on those shadows. Be willing to look at them. Trust and believe in the universe. Balance yourself with nature. Build sustainable practices. This is how we truly succeed. And it is worth it. It's worth it, not just for you, but for those that are an extension of you. And I don't know, man, my battery's about to die. This thing's about to die, but this year has taught me a lot that I'm like just beginning to swallow and process, to be honest. But I know next year, I know that it's because in this coming next year, there's a great abundance coming. It's already here. It's just about me embracing it properly and being able to put it into motion. And once that happens, it'll just be good. Better than good. So much more than I ever anticipated. I'm excited for it, and I'm excited to be able to share it with you. Thank you for listening to this. No, this was a random one. But I appreciate it. I appreciate you. I hope that you can take some time to focus on what this year has meant in comparison to last year. I'm probably going to do another video where I do that. I'll probably do it for the rest of the year, to be honest. But yeah, I hope you make the most. That even when things seem really crazy and you don't quite understand why they're that way, that you can still keep the faith and keep your disposition about you. And yeah, focus on your gifts, being thankful for receiving them, being open to giving of them, and watch your abundance come in. Because it's coming. It's coming. It's already here. It's already been here. Focus on it more and more and more and more. And more and more and more. And the more that you do, the more that you'll see it. to see if there's anything else, but there isn't. So, thank you. I love you. I hope you have a good day, good night, whatever it is, and I will see you in the next one.